All right, testing Twitch 1 2 3 1 2 3. I just heard that, and I have nothing on the desk.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3. Move around in your seat or something. See if it does it again. I didn't hear anything.
I'm not touching the desk, so I don't know.
Is your desk touching anything else, like on the side or anything?
No.
I don't know.
I don't know.
We should
I'm gonna just
hover.
stay away from it, I guess.
Yeah.
But it should be good.
All right. Let's start. Let me pull. All right. Hello and welcome to episode 175 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about the very final week of online Call of Duty in the 2025 CDL season. We're going to give our predictions on that. We also have a few conversations that we could have before we end the regular season, or as we get near the end of the regular season. Including Maven and MerK picking their MVP ballot as of right now. We also have a debate about who is maybe the best S&D player. We might get further into that, even though we did talk a little bit about it on the last episode. And are we in the CDL plumber era? I think that was Octane that said that, but we will potentially get into that as well. But before we do any of it, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm all right. Yeah, like you said, the literally last week of online Call of Duty matches for Black Ops 6 is coming up. Only 10 online matches remain, and then we are headed to Major 4 at DreamHack Dallas. And after that, we will know the full picture for champs, which 8 teams are officially solidified. And then all we have left is champs and Esports World Cup. So Black Ops 6 Pro season is quickly winding down here, but we still got some stuff to talk about, like you said. So ready to jump right in.
Yeah, so Maven and MerK, obviously, Maven and Nameless, sorry,
Nameless.
not MerK. Maven and Nameless, two of the top commentators. Nameless has been on the desk for years now. Maven was part and still is part of probably the most popular commentating duo, or certainly one of them. They gave their top 3 MVP contenders as of right now. I guess this could change over the next week and a half, right? Because if somebody comes out in Major 4, has a really dominant event, and helps their team win, then that could sway some voting. So Maven said his top 3 is Simp, Celium, and Hydra. Obviously, Simp and Cell part of that incredible two-peat or three-peat, however you want to define it. But certainly in this season, they won the first 2 majors of the season and are currently in first place in the CDL standings. And then Hydra, I don't think, according to his standards, has had the season that he would have hoped, considering he talked earlier in the year that some of the online stuff and some of the, I think it was the visa issues, kind of caused a little bit of trouble. Even though LAT has really, had a great season, regardless of some of the disappointing results, a little bit earlier in the year. But he's a great player and probably is very deserving of that mention. Nameless had a very similar list. He did not have Simp in his top 3. Instead, at the top, he had Scrap, who is probably the best player on LAT, which is honestly saying a whole hell of a lot, considering Hydra is on that team. But Nameless had Scrap, Cell, and Hydra as his top 3. What do you think about, like, obviously with FaZe and LAT, I think these are the only players really that you could consider. Like, in my personal opinion, we have talked about the Neptune case and how if you're just looking at how valuable a player is, he has probably the best argument, but he has not played the whole season. But so then LAT and FaZe have won all 3 of the majors so far this season, and these are the best players on these teams. So where do you fall? Who is kind of deserving of this honor, or who would be maybe in your top 3 as we're heading into the final week of online COD?
If I had to do my top 3 right now, as of the second week of Major 4 qualifiers, I would do Cell 1, Scrap 2, and Simp 3. Um, the biggest thing with the timing of this, though, is that there's still a whole fourth major to come before. The voting always happens before champs, so that's, it's announced at champs who the all stars and MVP, rookie of the year, all that stuff is. So, um, the fourth major really is going to have a big impact on this. If FaZe win Major 4, then I think it undoubtedly has to go to someone on FaZe because they'll have won 3 of the 4 tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
If LA Thieves win Major 4, I think you can really make a case for either a FaZe or an LAT player because they'll both have 2 championships. So then it comes down to the stats. The biggest thing in that instance will be, recency bias. There will probably be more people more likely to vote for LA Thieves than FaZe players, at least in my eyes. If, LAT win back-to-back tournaments
Yes.
closer to champs than FaZe did at the beginning of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And then if somebody else wins Major 4, then we have FaZe with 2 championships, LAT with 1, and then X team with 1. That actually goes in favor of a FaZe player for MVP in my eyes, but let's just say Optic win Major 4 and Mercury's absolutely pops off, he'll definitely get some Rookie of the Year and MVP votes just because of the instant impact and incredible turnaround that would literally have to happen in order for Optic to win Major 4. So that's just an example there. But yeah, I think this will obviously be, well, we will most definitely do our official votes and whatnot for All Stars, Rookie of the Year, MVP once Major 4 concludes. We'll have plenty of time in the break between that and COD Champs to do the um, official breakdown. But I think as of right now, and as of the time of the CDL and Maven and Nameless sharing their list, I think I would go Cell 1, Scrap 2, Simp 3. I think it has to be a FaZe player at this point, again, just because in my eyes it's 2 championships to 1, even though LA Thieves won the most recent one. And I think you have to consider who won MVP of the 3 tournaments so far, which was Simp at Major 1 MVP, Cell was the MVP of Major 2, and Scrap was the MVP of Major 3. So I feel like those 3 players have to be the top 3 so far at this point in the season. And, with the one more championship so far, I would lean towards Cell for my pick at this point.
I don't think that there is a wrong answer if you're just looking at the top 4 players, like all 4 players that were mentioned in these lists: Simp, Cell, Scrap, and Hydra. I think that really has to be most people's top 4. And I think if you're looking like right outside of that, and I should say right now, that is right now, just like you said, because if it is after Major 4, let's say Vancouver wins Major 4. Not saying Neptune will win or that he should win, but he's like undoubtedly like the 5th best player, or like if you're looking at like the top 5 MVP voting, like he has to be in the top 5 at that point, just simply because that showed the impact of his arrival. Even, we've talked about it a lot about how impactful it has been to this point. So I think it's tough. I would probably lean Cell and then Simp and then Scrap. But I don't, like I said, I don't have like this could change wildly even over the last week or the last 2 weeks, because, I don't have Hydra in that top 3, but I still think he is, probably he could literally be the best player this week, and he could be the best player next week, and he could win MVP, which, I think he did win league MVP, 2 years ago, or was that last year? No,
What are you talking about?
Hydra.
Hydra was 2 years ago. Yeah,
2 years ago when they won champs, right?
Yeah.
So
Simp won it last year, and then Hydra played Simp at round 1 of champs and went into game chat after it was a Rio hard point and was like, I'm the MVP or whatever, and it was really funny.
Yeah. So anything could really happen, I think, over this last week in regards to those 4 players. It's going to be really interesting. I don't have like a rooting interest, of course, and I don't really know how this is going to go because FaZe has been uncharacteristically kind of inconsistent when they go online. Like even this time, we talked about it, like how they've been really slow to start a lot of these qualifiers, but this time they started out fast and then they faltered in a match that they certainly were not expected to. And who knows how they'll finish out these qualifiers, and then we get to the major, and it's kind of all bets are off because we've seen so many upsets, especially in the first round of these first three majors. That FaZe, which lost in the first round, did not have the performance, the placing that they were expecting at major 3. If that happens again, then you kind of have to take that into account, especially if LAT, for example, have a very good event as well. So we'll see what happens with the MVP conversation as we continue to move on. One thing, I think it was something we thought we might talk about on the last episode, but we saved it for this one. It was this happened, I think, over the weekend. Octane tweeted, he actually quote tweeted a clip of Dashy just kind of roasting the Splice versus Luminosity like IW match, and there were a lot of missed shots in that game. I watched the clip and I was like, I don't remember it being like this, but this has been kind of a conversation around like the dynamic aim assist, where it has essentially helped players shoot straighter, essentially, and it has helped players look better in terms of like their skill. So Octane quote tweeted this. Obviously, he's now retired, but even in his day, he was considered one of, if not the best assault rifle player. It was like him and Formal were the two guys for a really, really long time, and Octane was certainly one of the most talented players, probably of all time. And he said, having a great shot used to get you places. Now it's the bare minimum. And then he said plumber era, which is kind of a reference to, I think, really JJ Redick was kind of like, he got the brunt of this because he said that, like, Bob Cousy, for example, who played in like the 50s and 60s for the Boston Celtics, he played against like plumbers and milkmen. And now people like, JJ played against like LeBron James and these like, all-time great players who have all the advantages in terms of like workouts and like the knowledge in basketball and stuff. And he obviously got a lot of flack for that because that is very, very disrespectful to all-time great players who played like 50 and 60 years ago. But I think that there's this like larger conversation around Call of Duty esports where the respect given to a player like, say, like Moho, who has not been relevant to like COD esports in like over a decade, but like in his day was a great player and certainly helped teams win. Or maybe even if you wanted to say a more relevant character would be someone like Parasite, who had like a relatively short stint where he was very successful, or even Killa. These guys had these like bursts of winning, but they haven't been very good over the past like 7, 8, 9 years. There's a lot of disrespect thrown on them and that they're like less talented or whatever. I would argue personally that they are less talented, but that does not mean anything really in the grand scheme of things. Like, I personally believe that like a lot of modern big men in the NBA are more talented than Bill Russell. That does not mean that they're better than Bill Russell, because in my opinion, it's all about what you do in your era. Like, it doesn't matter if Bill Russell could knock down a three-pointer. Three-pointers didn't exist when Bill Russell was playing. So that kind of stuff doesn't mean anything to me. Like, he was a very dominant player for his time and was kind of ahead of his time in a lot of ways. And I think of that in the same way as a player like Parasite, who was an incredible player, and just because he didn't have like this sustained success like Scump, for example, that doesn't mean that he was any less great than a player who right now could have a lot of success in these next 2-3 years, and then they don't have nearly the same kind of success over the next 10. I think that's why you have to look at someone like Scump, who had this like, I mean, if you really look at his career, it's kind of ridiculous that he was able to sustain his level of play for as long as he did, because there might have been players like that have like the peak like Scump, but not many. You could argue like Simp might get there at some point, or like Celium, but even then they still have like 5-6 years to go before you can really compare what Scump did. So I want to get your point of view, obviously I've rambled a little bit on the topic, but what do you think about this, like the advantages that current players have that have kind of like made it so, there is this, maybe even in jokes, but like there is this connotation of a plumber era existing in past Call of Duty?
I think on the just on the Scump front, like to round out what you were saying, Scump is definitely a unique case, and most of the Optic Dynasty guys are, in the sense of they did it in they did it pre
Hmm.
Jetpack era, CWL era, and CDL era. Like literally even uh well, Karma wouldn't have won in the CDL, I don't think,
No,
obviously as a
he
coach,
retired this
but
first year, but still,
yeah, so Skunk, Formal. Well, I don't even know if Formal would have with Chicago Huntsman. Regardless, though,
he
that's
was a
not
little
what
bit
we're.
different because he's still peaking, or he's still having a
Yeah,
great time in Halo and
yeah.
before he even came to COD.
Regardless, those guys are the unique cases there, where they are, you know, not to say plumber era proof, but they're like they were able to win championships regardless of what the title was, what type of movement it had, etc. So, um, outside of that, I do think this was just, kind of like you. Obviously, I really, when I hear plumber era, I think of mostly like the LeBron truthers trying to throw
Yeah,
shade at Jordan about his winning and who he played against when he won. But um honestly, the way, like, we won't know for sure just based on the brief wording in Octane's tweet, but it feels kind of like you can take him saying that like the current era is the plumber era, which would be the inverse of the sports analogy we're making, where you're talking about past eras being the plumber era. And Octane seems to say like it's easier
yeah,
nowadays due to like the aim assist and stuff you're saying. I When I initially saw the tweet, I of course instantly thought he was saying like, oh, he was playing in the plumber era because
yeah.
like look at these shots going on. So I do think that's kind of an interesting dynamic to this and how it would be different than sports. Again, everybody loves comparing esports and sports. And this would just be another instance of how it could be perceived differently.
Hmm.
I do think in that clip, I mean, like you, I really did not remember. I mean, I really enjoyed watching IW. And I don't remember, some of this stuff, like Slack's a player who won a title in multiple different COD games for like 5 consecutive years, something like he's got like 7 or 8 championships, I would say, and he's got like one in 4 or 5 straight COD titles at that time. So like,
Hmm.
you know, and then like you said, Octane too was they were showing shots. I know Dashy was laughing at Madcat's shot off the rip there. It is worth mentioning in this. I mean, when you got wall running and jetpacks and stuff, it's gonna look a little different than today's COD where people are just, boots on the ground and slide challing, and you don't have to worry about people literally flying in the air, which in my opinion definitely makes it harder to hit shots at certain gunfights. Um, but regardless, I just think this is an interesting um, conversation. And I think the best way to break it down is sort of like how I was saying with Scump and the eras. I mean, you could even say like do like a pre do like the first generation would be like GB and PCL ladders,
Yeah,
um and then you would go to like a pre jetpack era, which would be your Black Ops 1, Black Ops 2, Ghosts. Then we go to jetpacks with AW, IW, Black Ops 3. Um, then you move to the CWL and then the CDL era. I think there's a little mixing there just to turn depending on how you categorize like the movement in terms of like sliding versus slide canceling versus the
yeah.
snaking and all that stuff. But regardless, I just think that's like a really interesting way to look at it. And I think that could um lead to some, more interesting conversations, especially down the road, because um we look at the current era of the CDL. If you had to think about some of the most dominant players, I mean, a lot of the guys are the Atlanta Phase guys like you're mentioning. um but now does Black Ops 6 become its own, the start of the Omni movement era, if that is carried over into the next title? And if that's the case, does someone like Hydra or even Scrap start to, like make his case for best player in that era over some guys like Simp and Scrap, even if they're winning? So end of the day, I mean, people are always going to have their own opinions. I like you. I think when it comes to sports and stuff, and we say it all the time when we're talking even about COD, you can only play the teams put in front of you in COD. Those guys, like you mentioned, Bill Russell, Jordan, etc., they could only play against the people that were put in front of them at that current time. And as much as, even like Octane and Dashy in this tweet here, two of the best AR players, especially in terms of just like pure gun skill and in terms of shooting extremely straight. They're two of the best when it comes to that. I mean, they've had countless battles over the years, even if it wasn't a ton. So like that's a little different than that, but like people always say like, oh, I'd want to see Kobe in his prime versus Jordan in his prime, etc. And it's like stuff like that. You don't usually get a you just can't get an answer due to the way time and age works. But again, esports is a unique opportunity in the sense that we technically could, like, if Octane and Dash, you want to go back to IW and have a one-on-one. I mean, if it's on Steam, like they could even do it with the new, well, I guess not the new aim assist settings, but like maybe it's different because obviously IW is played on console. Um, but that I put it in the notes too. Like Mercules did a 1v1 video against all the guys on Optic today. Like that's something Mercules, the new hot kid on the market, doing a 1v1 against Scump, Formal, Karma, even Shotzi and Dashy, his current teammates, and the old Optic guys who even played against Hex, Embos, Pomage, Hitch, like a ton of them. Like we could see more of that if they really want to. I'm not saying this is like a huge topic at the end of the day, but the opportunity for that is definitely more readily available than sort of like we can't see Babe Ruth versus Shohei Ohtani in a home run derby, but we could in theory see Octane versus Dashy do a 1v1 with ARs in old CODs and new CODs, and that would be interesting to see how it works out. I mean, it doesn't even have to be those two guys, but that end of the day, that's a part of this that makes this conversation a little more interesting in my view from the esports perspective.
And you are right, because Octane actually said in the replies that this era is the Plumber era, and that's how he responded to Zero.
Oh, I didn't even see that.
Yeah, and then he said in another tweet, he said, Plumber era started after Vanguard for no specific reason.
Because he won champs in Vanguard.
Yeah. But I think like if I don't agree, obviously, that like we're in the Plumber era, but if you wanted to take that argument and like kind of expand on it, you could say like, look at what Bill Russell did. He won, I think, 11 championships in the 50s and 60s and maybe even like the very beginning of the 70s. But either way, like this was kind of like what we would consider like the pioneer era of the NBA before it was like a mainstream property and like a worldwide phenomenon thing. But if you look at like how many teams were in the NBA at that time, it's like not that many, right? Like it's maybe a dozen or so, or a little bit more, but certainly not 30 NBA teams. And certainly like with the Boston Celtics in particular, the talent was kind of stacked onto that team. And like, because there's only so much that, like the Philadelphia Warriors before they moved to moved to Oakland and became the Golden State Warriors. Like there's only so much that they could do in regards to just like having all those Hall of Famers on one team in Boston. But you could compare that to the CDL where there are only 12 teams. And this has been a conversation that's been had over the years about how like you only have to win like 3 series to win champs nowadays, where you used to have to win at least probably 2 series in your group and then have to play through the bracket to win. And I think that could be the argument, really, is that it was harder because it was more of an endurance competition back then, because you had to play so many matches in a weekend. and you had to play some teams that you had never played before. Like you didn't really know a ton about them sometimes because they were not pro teams. They were not teams that they would normally scrim, or that they wouldn't have like these streamed games. Like you can look up every single match except like that one that got played off stream. I forget what match that was, like last year. But like other than that, every match basically in the CDL has been broadcast. So if there's any official match that you want to go back and watch, you can do that. That wasn't the case like pre CWL era. So I could see the argument there, for like, is this the plumber era? But also like one thing that people always said about Michael Jordan is like, and it's a legitimate criticism, not about him because he can't do anything about this, but the NBA expanded so quickly in like the 90s that some of the teams were very diluted in talent. So you could say like this expansion team's absolutely horrible. Of course, like these better teams are just going to run up the score on these really bad teams, and like some of the better players are kind of, or some of the better teams are kind of diluted in that they can't be as great as they are now, where there hasn't been expansion for a really long time, and now you can stack talent on pretty much every team to a certain extent, and every team can beat any team. Um, the CDL is definitely in that era, right? Because we haven't had expansion at all in the CDL since the CDL started before the 2020 season. So for the last 5 years, it has been, I think it's hard pressed to say like, well, you lose players like Aches and TP and Karma and Scump and Formal and Crimsix and Clayster and all these really great players. Like, I don't think necessarily we have like that like a new generation of like these all-time legends, but that remains to be seen. But still, these teams are really, really good. Like, we've been able to see most of these teams, like I would say 10 of these teams can kind of beat each other. Like LAG and Vegas are the two teams that have proven like they really can't beat some of those top teams, even if they have come close. So I think there could be an argument there about like the CDL being really stacked and very competitive because of a lack of expansion. But I don't think I would be really, I think it's disrespectful to say any era is the plumber era. There are definitely eras that were maybe quote unquote easier to win in because of like accessibility and like just the limited number of teams. But like, I'm never going to say like it was easy to win a PCL because one, I don't know that much or as much as I probably need to have that conversation. And two, like they did not know most of the things that we now know. Like if Clayster in 2025 could go back to Clayster in 2009 and have a talk with them, Clayster in 2009 would have been even better than he was in 2009. So like that's kind of stuff.
Imagine telling Clayster in 2009, like, hey, dude, you're going to, in a couple of years, you're going to be able to play with controllers with buttons on the back of them that let you jump, and they're going to be actually allowed. It's not a modded controller that's banned or anything like that.
Yeah. Imagine him going back now and it's like, you should really cut your hair. Cut the ponytail. Not working.
One other thing for me that I was thinking while you were talking there too, and we can move on after this unless you got anything else. Um, the biggest difference, especially like you're talking about Bill Russell, I know a lot of people like to talk about Will and the lack of evidence for his 100-point game and all that stuff, and like you were saying with Bill Russell, like the lack of a 3-point line, obviously, in today's era, there's teams like the Celtics shooting 63s in a playoff game, which is just you tell Bill Russell that 60 years ago, he's probably like, what the hell are you talking about? The biggest difference there in terms of Call of Duty is the game is literally different every year. And the one thing, even beyond like the movement of each individual game. The one thing I like to keep track of on this podcast, and I probably haven't done as good of a job of it this year as I have in past years, is keeping track of like the highest number of kills in respawns and like a hard point. I know we were just talking about when Capsidal signed with C9. I still remember him on Bokage. I don't remember what the exact number is, but I know he dropped over 50 kills on Bokage Hardpoint in Vanguard. And I believe the record for a hard point this year is under 45, maybe 46. It's definitely under 50. Nobody's hit 50 this year. And that's like the example, right? Like you're talking about, like, people running up the scores and the quick expansion era for the NBA and stuff like comparatively in COD, like you can have a year where someone like Capital is dropping 50 kills in a hard point, and then a year like now currently nobody's dropping anywhere close to, not anywhere close, but nobody's dropping 50 kills on any map just because it's really hard to do it. I think maybe Joe Steve's at 46 on a red card hard point. I feel like that's the number. But regardless of the specifics, yeah, I mean, that's literally until, like we talked about it last episode, we brought it up, until there ever comes a day where there's just that one Call of Duty competitive game with all the maps and guns and etc. from years of past. Call of Duty is going to change every single year, and that's different because it's not like the 3-point line is being added every year. It's not a 4-point line, a 5-point line isn't being added to the NBA. They're not changing the rules every year and stuff like that. So that's another interesting component to this. But I do think, end of the day, yeah, that at least in terms of Call of Duty era, I wouldn't consider anything a quote unquote plumber era. I do like the way that, it kind of just based on the series of games, though, breaking it down that way. I think that's a pretty interesting. I mean, you can even look at guys like Aches and say like, yeah, Aches was pretty good pre jetpack era. Obviously won that first event at AW with the stitches in his hand and stuff, but I think he would tell you he didn't have the best uh years during the jetpack era, especially after the start of AW, and then he wins champs for a second time in the return to boots on the ground in World War II. So it's even guys like that, and you just look at the different eras and stuff. I think that's the best way to break it down, at least for COD.
Yeah, I think how you judge greatness, or how I judge greatness really, is in Call of Duty, it's about your adaptability. It is
Yeah,
year to
yeah,
year, can you deal with the massive changes sometimes that these games pop up? And granted, we should say there are players that they're so young that they didn't actually play in like the CWL in the jetpack era. Like they didn't have to go from boots on the ground to jetpacks back to boots on the ground. So we didn't really get to see how they adapted from that. I would imagine if you're truly great that you would have figured out a way. Like even players that I didn't think would translate as well. Like even like let's say like Clayster or Crim6, these like older pros, they were able to, in a really big way, able to transition back to boots on the ground and then win championships like after that. So like that's something that I really look at, especially in Call of Duty. It is not the same like for League of Legends or Counter-Strike. Like there are different eras in those, and it does depend on the changes in like champions for League of Legends or Counter-Strike. A lot of it comes down to the maps and some of the different metas that go on with that. But like they are playing the same game year over year. It's not the same for Call of Duty, and it makes it very difficult for these players to have consistent success. So when they do have consistent success, that's when we should really recognize them as like true great players. This S&D conversation, I know we had a little bit to talk about it on Sunday, but if you missed it, it was basically Slasher saying that he's the best S&D player of all time, like that he's better than Illy ever was. So I just thought it was interesting because Breaking Point, if you haven't been on Breaking Point's website, I would really recommend it, at least for if you're really into stats or just you want to look up a certain match. Like you can go back and you can pretty much see stats for a lot of these matches. But they have the since the CDL, or they don't have the inaugural CDL season, but the last 4 seasons, so 21, 2, 3, 4, and this year, they have the stats for every one of these seasons, and you can even sort it by all-time S&D KD. So I was just kind of looking it up because I wanted to see like who might have it. Like I'm discounting like Super technically has the best, but it's like a very small sample size, of course.
sure.
Decimate is second place, but again, very small sample size. The first place in terms of S&D KD since the 21 season is Celium, which I came into this thinking like, to me, he's probably the best, like at least from what I can remember of like, because I don't really think about like CDL players necessarily in that way very much because Cell is great in all game modes, so I'm not thinking of him as like, well, he's like this S&D guy. I think of Illy more in that way because like he came up as an S&D guy, and like that was very clearly his strength in the CDL as well. But Celium all time, and he's been playing since the CDL because I think his first season was 2019 with that FaZe Clan roster, if I'm not mistaken. So I think he came in before the CDL. So in these last 4 or 5 years, he has a 1.19 S&D KD, and that's pretty ridiculous.
I mean, it's not really surprising.
No, it's
like,
not.
He's always going to have really good KDs unless it's just a bad game for him. And even if it's a bad game for him, I still think he is just his play style, and people can talk about the snaking and whatnot. Obviously, some of those earlier CODs where there weren't as like strict GAs or attempts to GA snaking, he was, pretty he was going after it, and that's going to help you survive probably a little bit more. And if you're surviving a little bit more, it'll keep the KD up. But even regardless of snaking, just his play style and the reason he has a good KD, and he just values he knows how to play his life. He's a tough kill on the map, whether it's search, hardpoint, respawn, whatever. And I think that, especially if you got an AR and you got Simp and a BZ running in front of you, like if they aren't getting two pieces or trading each other, you're able to get the trades after them, and that's going to help too.
Yeah, so Atlanta FaZe currently has 3 of the top 4 all-time S&D KDs over the last 4 years. So Sella is obviously first, and then there's Simp at second, Hydra is in third, Abizi in fourth, and then there's Scrap, Dashy, Shotzi, Insight. So, and I think it's really interesting because Breaking Point not only gives you the S&D KD, but they give you the number of first bloods they have, their first deaths, their plants, their diffuses. And it's so crazy because it really illustrates your point that Celium values his life, and he's obviously been a primarily AR player. So AR players usually keep a little bit of a greater distance. They're not like, I'll say it in a minute what Abizi's is, but like you can imagine the difference in Celium, who's playing back a little bit more, plays a little slower in terms of like rushing in than Abizi. So Celium, he has 254 first bloods, 184 first deaths. That is both the, not including, so in terms of first deaths, that's the lowest of like the top 7 or top 8. So like obviously that shows he's not the first one to die very often. And he probably, if he is the first to die, it does not mean good things for FaZe, I'm sure. In terms of first bloods, he has like the 5th most, or like the 3rd worst, like among that group. So he has 254 first bloods. Abizi has 585 first bloods. And his first deaths, again, Celium had 184 first deaths. Abizi has 534 first deaths. So he has like 3-4 times what his teammate has in terms of, and that makes sense. Like literally the whole read on Abizi's career has been, he's literally one of the most aggressive players of all time. Like if you believe Celium values his life more than anything, Abizi values the number of lives he can get. So he is making the most of it. He's trying to completely just run at the other team and making them uncomfortable. And then you have like someone like Simp, who is kind of in the middle of those two. And I think that's why this trio has worked so well, at least in Search, which, I mean, before this past major, they had won like 91% of their Search and Destroy maps on LAN. So like that was kind of that's kind of the success here, is that they're able to basically like feed off of each other. And it also, one last thing on these stats is the plants and diffuses. So, it's Celium has, he's not going to rush in, so he should not have the bomb. He should not be planting the bomb if he's going to be valuing his life. It's still crazy how few times he's literally planted a bomb and search and destroy, though. So Simp is by far the most. Like, he's the OBJ king in search and destroy. He has 387 plants in his career, or in the last 4 years. Celium has 46. That seems like an error. That seems like they shouldn't.
Yeah, I mean,
It just doesn't seem logical for him to play 4 years and be averaging like 10 bomb plants a season. But that's it's logical for him to play 4 years and be averaging like 10 bomb plants a season. But that's where we are right now.
you think about it, Abizi's not going to be carrying the bomb because he's going in first. So if he dies rushing, the bomb's going to be in a bad spot.
Yeah.
And, that just makes the round tougher for FaZe.